time for Action News for Kids.
Stay with us for the next half hour as we look into the mysteries of Halley's Comet and its long-awaited return to our night skies. I'm Kurt Milligan.
And I'm Monica Van Wert. A group of local kids who raise rabbits for fun and for show, a post office that does more than just sort mail, and a talk with the man who created Gumby.
1986 is sure to go down in history as the year that a space traveler from the distant universe makes its long-awaited visit to Earth. It's not a Martian spacecraft or an extraterrestrial we're talking about. It's Halley's Comet. This cousin to the stars appears in our night sky only once every 76 years. So for most of us, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get a glimpse of it. Action News for Kids reporter Michael Frost has some tips on how to look for the comet and some amazing facts about its history.
People have studied the stars for thousands of years, but this year is a special one. For the first time since 1910, Halley's Comet will return to the night sky. Halley's Comet was named for an English astronomer, Sir Edmund Halley, who first saw it in 1682, calculated its orbit, and predicted it would return in 1758. Although Sir Halley did not live to see his prediction come true, the comet reappeared right on schedule. It was observed by scientists around the world. Unlike the planets which travel around the sun in a circular orbit, comets have a long elliptical orbit. Halley's Comet takes 76 years to complete one orbit, which is why it's only seen once every 76 years. Every appearance has been recorded going back to 87 BC. In the past, comets were feared by people who didn't understand them. This French drawing from 1858 shows a comet as a ghostly visitor. They were thought to bring flood, sickness, and famine to the earth. Halley's Comet made one of its most famous appearances in 1066, as William the Conqueror invaded and took control of England. Its picture hanging over a battlefield in the famous Bayeux Tapestry. Today, astronomers are very interested in studying Halley's Comet. At the Copernic Observatory, astronomer Jay Sardin uses modern technology to help.
Michael, this is a computer which keeps track of Halley's Comet, and it tells us where in the solar system the comet is. And right there on the screen, the comet passes by the Earth, goes around the sun, and goes right back out into space.
With this program, you can give the computer any date and it will show you exactly where the comet will be in its orbit. Once you know where to look, the dome of the observatory can be opened and rotated to allow the telescope to be pointed in any direction.
All right, Michael, here's our big telescope. Once you get up there on the ladder. And what I'm going to do is aim it a little bit higher so we can pick up the moon.
What is a comet?
Okay, you may be surprised to hear this, Michael, but astronomers know very, very little about comets, and that's one reason why we're so excited about this passage of Halley's Comet. But as far as we know, comets are like cosmic icebergs. So if you can imagine a piece of ice, maybe about 5 miles across, that's what a comet is. And it has no tail. It's just this piece of ice floating around the sun.
What do they look like?
Okay. That, as I said, when the comets are very far from the sun, we can't see them, even through our largest telescopes. But when this piece of ice gets near the sun's radiation will heat it up, and the comet will start to form a tail. So that when we look at a comet when it's near the sun, it appears to be a fuzzy, star-like object with a tail streaming away from the sun behind it.
Do comets have any effect on Earth?
Well, if a comet landed in your backyard, it would have a very big effect on your backyard and the city of Binghamton. But unless they actually hit the Earth, we don't think they have any effect on the Earth. In 1910, for instance, the Earth actually passed through the tail of Halley's Comet, and although a lot of people thought the world was going to end, it obviously didn't, and even the tail of a comet is so empty, is so close to being a vacuum, that even hitting the tail of a comet would not affect the Earth in any way that we know about it.
Why is Halley's Comet especially famous?
The thing that I think that makes it most famous were two things. One is, relative to most comets, Halley's Comet is very bright. And two, since it's been in orbit around the sun every 76 years, we have seen it many times It was first seen in the 3rd century BC and has been seen continuously for over 2,200 years. And we like to tell people that when you see Halley's Comet, you're seeing the same comet that Julius Caesar saw in the 1st century BC, the same comet that Attila the Hun saw in the 5th century AD, the same comet that William of Normandy saw when he invaded England in 1066. Mark Twain saw it here in the Southern Tier in 1910. Albert Einstein saw it. And so we like to stress with people, when you see Halley's Comet, you're looking at a comet that was seen by most of the famous people who have ever lived on the Earth, no matter how long ago they've lived.
How can people in this area see Halley's Comet?
Well, we're suggesting, number one, that you have a pair of binoculars. Nothing special, not a telescope necessarily, but if you've got a pair of binoculars and you look out toward the west after sunset, you will see a very bright object called Jupiter. And if you take your binoculars and look above Jupiter and just start moving up in the sky, you should see a fuzzy star, and that will be Halley's Comet. Best time to look, maybe 6 to 7 p.m.
Halley's Comet won't return again until the year 2062. Let's see. I'll be 86 years old by then. I'm Michael Frost for Action News for Kids.
The Copernic Observatory will be open for public viewing of Halley's Comet every clear Wednesday and Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. from now until January 17th. Call 748-3685 or 772-0660 to check on viewing conditions.
Because Halley's Comet is only visible once every 76 years, it's not surprising that scientists know very little about it. During the comet's last appearance in 1910, it was studied and photographed through telescopes. But since then, the space age has taken hold. This year, Halley's Comet will be studied by 5 spacecrafts from all around the world. Here's that story from NASA.
Comet Halley is making its regular 76-year pilgrimage around our sun, as it has been doing for countless centuries. The comet is the target of study for 5 exploratory spacecraft from Europe, Japan, and the Soviet Union, each whizzing by the giant snowball of ice, gas, and dust from different vantage points. The European Space Agency's Giotto spacecraft will be the most daring probe by taking a flight path just 300 miles in front of the comet's head. Giotto hopes to photograph the comet's nucleus. 2 other highly instrumented Soviet spacecraft, Vega 1 and Vega 2, are scheduled to fly by the comet at a distance of 6,000 miles, hoping also to obtain images of the comet's nucleus. Lastly, 2 Japanese spacecraft studying Halley are Planet A, which approaches the sunward side of Halley at a distance of 120,000 miles, and Sakigake, which will pass about 4 million miles from the comet. A list of other American spacecraft slated for study of the comet includes Astro 1 and the Spartan Halley platform. Both will be maintained by the Space Shuttle, the Solar Maximum Mission satellite, Pioneer Venus, and the International Cometary Explorer. In order to get the best use out of all the research being done on the comet, the International Halley Watch was organized. Thousands of scientists and amateur and professional astronomers from 47 different countries have joined forces. The Halley encounter is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to study one of the most primitive objects in our solar system. A program dedicated to visiting some of the planets in our solar system with 2 unmanned probes has had a history of success ever since its beginning. In 1977, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were both launched on their way to Jupiter and Saturn. Now, having logged nearly 2 billion miles in space since 1977, Voyager 2 will point its sensors and TV cameras at a planet we have never seen up close, Uranus. Voyager project scientist Dr. Edward Stone, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California.
Well, there are several unique things about Uranus. First of all, it's the most remote planet that we will have visited in the solar system. It formed in a much colder region of the solar nebula and therefore is made of different materials than either Jupiter or Saturn. So we'll be studying the different properties of Uranus and its satellites. The other interesting thing about Uranus is that it's tipped over on its side with its spin axis at this time basically pointing at the sun. So it has a much different orientation with respect to the sun.
Many questions will be answered during the encounter before the tiny 1-ton spacecraft ventures even further into our solar system to visit the 8th planet from the sun, Neptune.
Coming up, we'll meet a local 4-H group who raises rabbits, and we'll look at some stuffed animals that almost look alive. So stay tuned. A program that's been real popular is the Rabbit Club because the bunnies are fairly easy to raise. Here's a look at how local kids get their rabbits ready for show.
Many people only think of rabbits at Easter time, but 4-H members in Broome County make rabbits a part of their everyday life. Raising rabbits is a big responsibility. They have to be fed every day and given fresh water 2 to 4 times a day. They also have to be brushed regularly to keep their coats in good condition. Why raise rabbits? 4-H leader Rita Bush explains.
Well, rabbits are raised for fur, they're raised for show, they're raised for laboratory testing. Not much of that is done anymore, but they were raised, and for showing, basically for showing.
Before a rabbit can be taken to a show, it must have an identifying tattoo on its ear. To win a ribbon, the rabbits must pass the critical eye of the judge.
The first thing a judge would do when he gets a class of rabbits is check for their health. Check their ears, make sure there's no ear mites. Check for no colds in their noses. Okay, the next thing that should be checked is their weight. Okay, we've got 4, and that's almost a perfect weight. This one's 4.5, which is the perfect weight in the standards for this breed. You check for coats, how their coats are. This one right today is molting. It's shedding very badly. This one has a better coat to it. You check to make sure there's no bumps or lumps along the sides for cysts or any type of other medical problems. Okay, on this breed they should be very long and stretched out. Right today, this animal right here would be the best of these 2 animals. This one would get a blue, and this one would get a red.
But besides winning ribbons for their owners, the rabbits all have personalities of their own.
I give them all kinds of names that suits them best. Like if we get a strange one that acts like afraid and stuff, we'll call him Spooky and stuff.
Raising rabbits is something that almost any kid can do. They don't take up much room, and you can see that they don't put up much of a fuss. I'm Amira Barnes for Action News for Kids.
Those bunnies kept their owners pretty busy, and our next story is about a man who spends even more time with his animals. But in this case, the critters don't have to be fed or watered. Instead, they're skinned, stuffed, and put on display. It's all part of a very old art called taxidermy.
The Perkins family has been stuffing and mounting animals since the 1890s. Bill Perkins carries on the taxidermist trade in Delhi. You name it, he's stuffed it at some point in his life. Everything from this huge Alaskan caribou to bears, birds, and fish.
The biggest thing I've ever done is, the last thing was a Kodiak bear, but the smallest thing was a housefly.
How do you stuff a housefly?
Different.
One of the most unusual specimens is this 2-headed calf born at a nearby farm. Whether mounting a head or stuffing an entire animal, Perkins says each project requires extensive measuring, then skinning, cleaning, and salting. He prefers using dried preservatives rather than tanning the hides. Although stuffing songbirds has since become illegal, Perkins says one of his hardest jobs was doing a hummingbird. He enjoys being creative and has about 400 molds for mounting deer heads in different positions.
One good thing about it is that this is if you can recreate something to look like it's still alive, that in itself is an accomplishment.
Taxidermy keeps Perkins busy 52 weeks a year, and he says he's anywhere from 6 months to a year behind because he's got so much work. His son has taken up the trade too, which will make the 4th generation to continue with taxidermy. Even after doing this work for over 40 years, Perkins says he still learns something new every day.
Coming up, we have the tale of Gumby and a look at a post office that does more than just sell stamps.
And now, back to Action News for Kids.
For decades, in many areas far from cities, the post office was the most important link to the outside world. Looking back to that time, the Smithsonian has moved a one-room post office from West Virginia to their Museum of American History in Washington, D.C.
Built in 1860, the Headsville Post Office served the people of Mineral County, West Virginia for over half a century. It stopped providing postal service in 1912, but was used for another 18 years as a general store. Once again, this little country store is being used. It was rebuilt in 1971 and is providing service for visitors to the Smithsonian Museum of American History. In 1970, Carl Scheel of the Smithsonian started looking for a suitable country post office. For many years, in communities around the country, these buildings had been the main link to the outside world. The search eventually covered 13 states and 10,000 miles.
I knew immediately that this had the best potential of any we had seen up to that time. And we did gain entrance. The owner was there. And not only was the outside perfectly preserved, as originally constructed, but the interior had never been altered. The original shelves, counters, and even many of the products offered for sale from the days that it was an active store were still in place. It was, in effect, a time capsule.
Many of the items found in the store are from the early 1900s. There are toys from the First World War and a whole variety of general merchandise. Some of the name brands are still being sold today. Others are lost to history. The Headsville Post Office is a living museum that gives visitors a chance to visit the past. For Action News for Kids, I'm Rebecca Rosenberg.
Now let's take a look at this week's kids calendar. Although the Ross Park Zoo is closed for the season, January 18th and 19th will be open house days, featuring a sneak preview of the brand new cougar exhibit. Special tours and demonstrations will be conducted both days from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The Finch Hollow Nature Center will hold a winter fun festival on Saturday, January 18th from 1 to 4 p.m. Snowshoeing, sledding, movies, refreshments, and lots more will all be free.
If you spend a lot of time watching television, maybe one of your favorite cartoon characters is just a little green clump of clay. Here's a look at the character of Gumby and the man who created him.
He is Gumby, and over the course of 3 decades, he has risen from a slab of blue-green clay to a superstar. He is perhaps one of the most flexible actors of our time, whether it be westerns,
I know one thing, Ricochet. You get out of town now.
Science fiction,
Get ready to land.
or even an historical piece like Washington's crossing of the Delaware.
Gumby, can you contact our spy?
Gumby has shown an ability to capture the American imagination. He has even dabbled in directing. His creator is Art Clokey.
I told my children stories at night before they went to sleep and transposed some of those stories into Gumby stories, and that sort of spirit carried over the affection I had for my children.
Clokey traces Gumby's roots of origin to Gumbasia. Clokey first experimented with claymation, using animated clay forms and setting them to jazz music. That was 30 years ago. In the 80s, Gumby has bounced back. On home video, in dolls, and this watch, 200,000 were sold this Christmas. The Gumby boom is partially due to Eddie Murphy's comical portrayal of Gumby on Saturday Night Live.
Act for me. Make magic. You're beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Gumby. Rolling!
A hot air balloon might not be the most comfortable way to travel, but the guys in our next story don't care. They're setting out to break their own record, the record for the longest balloon flight ever. How to prepare for an experience like this? Let's take a look.
Phil Johnson has traveled further in a hot air balloon than anyone else on Earth. Now he wants to go even further. About a year ago, Johnson, along with Harold Warner, navigated their balloon more than 1,400 kilometers. They were forced to land in Nebraska because of fatigue and bad weather. Now the two are planning to break their own world record by learning from their mistakes.
This trip should be more successful. Hopefully it'll be a lot more comfortable for us too, because we'll be warmer, and we'll have the basket set up a lot better than we had it set up last year.
They'll be using a fuel that's a combination of propane and butane. It'll burn hotter and take them further than propane alone. But most importantly, they plan to be more comfortable. For the 48 hours or so, they hope to be aloft. The team also plans to have better navigational and communication systems, so they know where they are at all times. Where the balloon will finally touch down, no one can say. That depends on which way the wind blows. Right now, the team can only prepare the equipment and wait for the right weather. And that could take weeks.
The weather system that has to be in place is a system of high pressure systems and low pressure systems, basically drawing them from west to east.
The goal is to fly more than 1,900 kilometers and stay up for more than 40 hours. They think that would set a record that might never be broken. Well, maybe never.
If we're successful this time, this is probably the last. We'll do it for a while anyway, at least until next year.
You may not be planning a record-breaking balloon launch, but you just might know of something else that would make an interesting or unusual story for us. If you send us a story idea that we use on the air, we'll send you an Action News for Kids t-shirt, like the ones we're wearing.
So send your letters to Action News for Kids, WBNG TV, Box 1200, Binghamton, New York, 13902.
We're out of time for today, but be sure to join us again next week, Friday at 4, when we'll visit the Edge of the Mountain Indian Museum in the town of Deposit.
Till then, have a safe week and a happy one.
The preceding was pre-recorded.